At a recent interview, Elon Musk shared more information about the Tesla bot, also known as Optimus. He said that he expects everyone will want one to take care of our kids, walk the dog, go get groceries. He sees not only humanoid bots like C-3POs, but also other forms like R2-D2s. Elon also explained how the third generation of the bot will then be called version 1, will now have new muscles in the forearm to make the new 22 degrees of freedom hands as human-like as possible. Then in a big surprise, he said, you should be able to customize and personalize your bot with wraps, just like everyone is doing with the Cybertruck. Apparently Pharrell is wanting to make his own version. As if this wasn't enough, we also got breaking news from Nvidia where they've made a major breakthrough in training of the bots. We'll watch exactly what they've done. I've got Scott Walter joining us. Scott is a two-time robotics company founder. Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, hello, Herbert. And so I don't know if Pharrell is going to be dressing up the Optibots. If he ends up doing cats, we could end up with a design which would be called Feral Cats.
Feral cats. Okay, gotcha. Yep. Love it. Okay, Scott, we're going to show a number of videos of Elon Musk himself in a recent interview talking about the bots. We've collected together, wanted to get your input on all these things he said about it. Brand new info, by the way. But before that, I think this Nvidia video that I'm going to show here is pretty impressive. Nvidia came out showing that they found a breakthrough way of training the bots. We'll watch that video first, and then we'll come back to it later.
Accelerate Project Groot, a general humanoid robot foundation model. Nvidia researchers capture human demonstrations, seeing the robot's hands in spatial overlay over the physical world. They then use RoboCasa, a generative simulation framework integrated into Nvidia Isaac Lab to produce a massive number of environments and layouts.
Wow, look at that.
They increase their data size using MimicGen-NIM, which helps them generate large-scale synthetic motion datasets based on the small number of original captures. They trained the Groot model on Nvidia DGX Cloud with the combined real and synthetic datasets. Next, they perform software-in-the-loop testing in Isaac Sim in the cloud and hardware-in-the-loop validation on Jetson Thor, before deploying the improved model to the real robots. Nvidia Osmo Robotics Cloud Compute Orchestration Service manages job assignment and scaling across distributed resources throughout the workflow. Together, these computing platforms are empowering developers worldwide to bring us into the age of physical AI-powered humanoid robots.
Oh my gosh, that is so impressive. Scott, do you think then that that this now shows that they have a way to basically train robots easily, quickly, anything that's possible? What was your quick reaction to that video?
Well, that seems to be the logical way to go about teaching the bots, because you've got to get the data in to get a good starting point. And we can break it down exactly what all the different steps are that they're doing. But overall, it seems like a very logical kind of flow that you would want to do to be able to take a small set of real world data inputs and from that come up with a lot of training to make sure that the robot is very robust in doing similar kinds of tasks later on, even though it's not identically what it was in the original training set. So I'm not surprised they were able to do that. And it certainly, makes logical sense to me that's what they would like to do. And we can compare it to what's already been done in the past with a lot of machine learning algorithms and how you go about trying to take these different little agents or simulated life forms that you have, and then being able to create intelligence out of them to get them to do certain kinds of tasks. And what this does is this becomes kind of a shortcut to get you very close to the end result. So whenever you are training something, if you're trying to find the answer to a problem, if you have no idea what the answer could be, it's really hard to find it sometimes. But if you get a really good guess at what the answers be, then it's very easy to kind of hone it in and be able to identify what is the precise answer. And that's sort of what they're doing here.
Thank you. We're going to go back to that, go through each of those sections of what he did. What's so cool was they actually used an Apple Vision Pro to use that to simulate, and then they teach it. Okay, let's go back to Elon Musk and the bot. He shared a number of new information. First one that was interesting was wraps. Did not realize this was going to be the case.
I mean, initially we're starting like production unit one of production design one of Optimus, which we'll do some basic stuff in the Tesla factories next year, because we want to iron out a lot of details. It's just to make sure it's useful. And for the first year or so, it's going to require quite a lot of babysitting from engineering, and then hopefully when we get to 2026, that'll be when we could sort of sell it outside of the company, because have be confident that it'll work reasonably well and respond to voice commands and that kind of thing. So, and then you'll be able to sort of, I think, customize how the robot looks as well, long term. Because you can kind of shell or skin the robot however you like. So I think there'll be wide variations in how the robot looks, how the robot looks, and maybe like some third parties could do cool things. Just like there's like cool third party wraps of the Cybertruck. That's some really creative art, I think. So the Cybertruck's like, even though it ships as kind of like bare stainless steel, it ends up having some of the most interesting art in terms of how it's wrapped. And so it's really quite unique. And actually, I was talking to Pharrell. He was obviously very creative, and I think he has some ideas for doing a Pharrell version of an Optimus, for example, which would be pretty cool to have like different artists come up with different versions of Optimus.
What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, well, I was expecting you're going to need some customization, because when you have a lot of them out there, you want to be able to tell them apart. And you can either put football jerseys on them where you're just looking at them by numbers, or something else to be able to identify it. And also, it's going to depend upon the use case. You're going to need some sort of garments for the robots to wear, depending upon what they're doing. So if they're operating the kitchen, you really want the robots to be wearing kitchens, just like a human to be wearing robots if they're doing any sort of, or humans to be wearing gloves or something like that if they're doing food prep, just not only for sanitary reasons, but to be able to protect the skin, or in this case, the mechanisms of the robots from, whatever the material is that you're cutting up. So you're going to be seeing lots of things like that are going to be like a form of personal protection equipment for the bots. And so, hey, why not have a designer come in there and give a little bit of extra flair as well?
One of the questions that was asked at the annual the Q2 earnings call, one of the retail questions was, what kind of accessories are you going to sell for the bot? He kind of laughed it off and says, well, the bot is like a human. So whatever accessories a human has, which is clothes and, whatever that we can use, it can use gloves and shoes. So then why would you wrap the bot first? Like that part is interesting.
Yeah, I guess it could also depend whether, is it just for looks? Is it also like a form of protection? So a lot of times the reason you wrap the Cybertruck is you want it to look good, but also you're trying to add a little bit of extra protection from, any sort of debris or something like that to be on the road. So depending upon how you plan on configuring your bot, you're going to have to put something on to be able to protect the joints and everything else. I mean, just the fingers, we've seen the fingers have these exposed joints where if you were to get dust or particles or liquids or anything like that in there, it's going to gum up the mechanism. So you're going to have some kind of glove. Now, I don't think it's going to be the standard kind of latex gloves we're used to putting on, because the form factor is a little bit different. It might be a little bit harder to pull over. So, you're going to come up with something that should be easy for the bot to be able to put on and off, and be able to change. The bots will be wearing aprons when they're in the kitchen for the same reason, and that is to protect themselves from it. And then if you're working in the factory, you have all these other things to worry about, debris, solvents, dust, any chips that are being produced, all that. So yeah. And, at the same time, it's like, when you buy your phone, what's the first thing you do? You get some sort of protection for that. And it might be the same thing, depending upon the environment the bot's in. You might get some form of headgear or something like that, just to protect
I think that's what it is.
Something like that.
It's going to be a face. You're going to put different faces.
Could be all kinds of things like that. So, I mean, there is going to be equipment like that that's just going to be necessary, that will be a kind of consumable, that will be this kind of cottage industry people are going to be coming up with to be able to protect the bots. And again, you go into a factory, and if all the bots are the same and you're trying to find a particular one, it's going to be pretty hard. It might be a lot easier, especially depending on if the bots are dedicated for certain kinds of operations. then you might want to have like team jerseys or something like that to know these are the bots that are doing this particular task right now, and another color for something else, and even numbering them. And we've seen that even Agility had numbers in the backs of digit, but you had to look really closely, and it's like, well, wait, that one's 22 and that one's 16 or something like that. And it'd be a lot nicer to be able to tell it from the distance which bot is doing what.
And to be successful in consumer, you need to be personalized.
Yeah.
You need to make your own.
So the same thing. You remember when everyone went to a dinner in Silicon Valley, maybe about 10, 15 years ago, everyone put their iPhones down on the dinner table. No one could tell them apart because they were all the same color, right?
Yeah.
And so they started coming with colors to everything else. That way you can tell, oh, that's my phone that I'm picking up and not yours.
Yeah. I just love that Tesla's thinking about this, because obviously it's just amazing how this all comes together. It's the only way, one of the greatest ways to sell so much. All right, let's show another clip when he was talking about the Forearm. You've already been predicting this. You already knew that this was going to come even before they did say. So they said, I'm going to do 22 degrees of freedom. I remember you saying that there needs to be something different with the Forearm to control that. They ended up doing that. He explains why. And this is why there's now a third hardware revision before the end of this year. Then they're going to call that version 1. They'll start producing thousands of them for Tesla's use for next year. But the reason why the Forearm's needed, he'll explain this, and then you explain to all of us.
And for the Optimus robot, that's really an extension of what we've learned with the car. So the car is a robot with 4 wheels, intelligent robot with 4 wheels, and Optimus is an intelligent robot with arms and legs. So in the case of Optimus, we had to design every part of the robot from scratch, all the motors and gears and electronics and sensors all had to be designed from scratch. And also we had to learn how to operate all of these motors and sensors. You really get to learn a lot about how the human body works, and you realize there's a reason why we evolved this way. There's a reason why the muscles that operate your hand are actually located in your forearm, because if you look at your sort of hand, it's sort of like it's like a puppet basically, and the puppet strings are in your forearm. And there are a small number of muscles that are actually in the hand, but most of the muscles that operate your hand are in your forearm. So with the current version of Optimus, we actually have the actuators in the hand, but with the new version that we're moving to later this year, the actuators are in the forearm, and really emulating how a human hand works. So, and there really are no motors, and there are no actuators. When I say actuator, an actuator would be like motor plus gearbox plus power electronics and sensors. There are no actuators that you can buy for really any amount of money that work well for a humanoid robot. So we have to go back to physics first principles and design all of the actuators from scratch. So it's a tremendous amount of work, and I think it'd be very difficult for any company that does not have that's not extremely good at designing actuators to make an effective humanoid robot. And then it'll have the same brain as the car. So initially hardware 4 and then hardware 5 in 26. And then just as the car is learning how to navigate reality, it's the same basic process for the humanoid robot.
Pause there. Tell us what you heard.
Okay, so what he's done is he's elaborated on some statements that he kind of made in the past. And so let's back up a couple of months. And do you remember where he first mentioned the 22 degree of freedom hand and why he did? It was a bolt out of the blue during a weekend. And I think someone else had been already starting a thread talking about humanoid bots and how they're going to have this big impact. And he just kind of threw it in as a comment somewhere that like, oh, the next version will have 22 degrees of freedom. And it's like, wow, that was really interesting, already knowing that they're modifying the hand. And then later on in that same thread, he said, oh, by the way, we're going to move most of the actuators back into the forearm. And so I already was intrigued that like 22 degrees of freedom means they're getting ready to make some sort of change, trying to figure out what they were. And then by going to the actuators, like, oh, that's a major design change, because already by adding that extra degree of freedom, which was going to be really this, they would need an extra actuator. And they've already got 6 of them stuffed in somewhere in the palm of the hands. And they had to put a seventh one in there. So that was already going to be tough. They're either going to have to make them a lot more compact or find the space for that. So he said most of them back there. And again, remember, he talked about the human hand is like most of your muscles are back there, even though you do have a few there. So they may be looking at it and saying, well, what are the muscles that are actually in the human hand? Where they're, it's probably something to do with the thumb. Okay. But so they might have one actuator left over to still do the thumb, but everything else is going to be moved back here. Well, you've got a little bit of space back there. It's still pretty tight, which means they're really redesigning that whole thing to be able to stuff them in there. And it means like the whole arm, everything else has changed. That's why I wasn't surprised for them to really say that there is another generation, which is going to be modified quite a bit. So I'm expecting to see them taking that same approach, because before he didn't really say why they went to 22 degrees of freedom. What was the motivation for doing that? It sounded like, well, they probably realized they needed a bit more movement. And then, maybe along there, another motor. I guess we have to put it back there. But no, he was saying his first principles. He began to study it and realizing, nature put it back there. Maybe we should look at that. Well, nature designed a few other things different than what we're seeing in the bots. And I've gone on and on about this in other people's channels and here before, is that we've got a ball and socket joint up here. We don't have 3 joints. The Tesla bot has 3 joints. Every other bot that's out there basically has a 3-joint model for the shoulder to get the kind of movement that you get with a ball and socket joint. So are they studying that? Are they thinking about is there going to be a different way of being able to actuate that, and looking again at how getting inspiration from the human body to try to figure out what's the best way to be able to do it? So I would not be surprised to see that kind of same thinking, first principles thinking, being applied in other parts of the body. So it will be very different than we expect this production version 1. Now, I don't know if he went into the number in whether he mentioned it this time, but he did mention a few weeks ago the number of production version 1 that they're expecting to have. And that is 1,000 in the factory. And then he said 1,000, maybe a few thousand.
He said a few thousand. Yeah, it could be 2, could be 3.
So could be 2 or 3, but it's at least 1,000. Now that means a couple of things. One, to knock out 1,000 or a few thousand, you've got to have some kind of ramp up. Some way of that you're producing those actuators at scale, and not having craftsmen and artisans going in there trying to build them one at a time. You're starting to ramp that up a little bit and test it out to see how it's working, because that's a reasonable production run right there to get that going. And at the same time, if you want to test these things out, you really want to test it with what you expect to produce in the future, with the same kind of quality and issues and design that would be going into it. It also means they've identified 1,000 locations within the factory that they want to put Optimus in. That's a lot of different locations that they've gone out and identified and are confident it would be able to do, and are getting ready to do the training for that. Another thing that Jeff Lutz has pointed out is that some of those bots are producing, they're going to be putting them through basically destructive testing. They're just going to run them as hard as possible. They're, it's not going to be that they're kicking them over or anything like that, those kind of tests, but, really having them lift very heavy weights repeatedly again and again, working them really hard, probably checking them in very harsh environments. Jeff mentioned that, you want to do some sort of water test or soap test, or being in a very dusty environment, everything else. So a lot of those are going to be for that reason. And others are going to be, like Elon said, babysitting in the factory. They're going to be going in there and making sure it's doing something. Now, if you take 1,000 Tesla bots, which means you've got about 1,000 different tasks in there, and you just throw them in one of the factories, I don't care whether it's Fremont or Giga Texas, you're going to be upsetting production if it's not going very well, or if it's not going slow. Well. I mean, you don't want to do that, if it's going to impact it. So I've always had this theory, and I'm pretty sure this is what they're going to be doing. They're going to be doing it on the S and X line. They're going to put it in there because if you cause the line to shut down for a few hours, it doesn't matter in the end of the day, the production, because they're only running one shift. And what they could probably do is they could do this on a second shift. Say, okay, we'll have the normal shift go through. In the second shift, we'll bring in, now the B team, which is going to be, the out by, and they're going to be clumsy and slow and everything else, but it doesn't matter. And every single car that we produce after that, is basically going to be a bonus car that we've been able to produce. Now, it's not like the car's going to come out with the worst quality or something like that. It's just going to be a little bit slower, maybe in loading or something like that. But once they get that going, that will be the real test. And I think there's actually more places on those lines that are not automated already, that there's more opportunities. Again, They don't have the gigacasting. Because they don't have the gigacasting, they have a lot more spot welding robots that you can go and use. Now, here's the other thing. How are they selling so many Cybertrucks at a premium right now?
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Foundation Series, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider buying an S or X next year if it said made by Optimus?
I don't know.
Optimus Edition S or X?
I don't think it's that special.
I think I think it could be built by Optimus. If you said, okay, these are the first that are coming off and not built by, it's like a very vast number of those are on there. That could be
some sort of foundation
an opportunity.
series or something.
Yeah.
Special
exactly.
series.
Special
okay,
series, the Optimus series. Yeah.
Right. So I think that I love your thinking. I love it. Makes sense. S and X production line, but maybe the 1,000 or 2,000 doesn't have to be on the production line. It can be on the periphery. That's what Jeff always said, that if you introduce things like this, you can always go like
but there's
the
plenty of
painting
places.
shop or the battery placement thing. That's the kind of stuff that he was showing.
The loading and the unloading of the sheet metal into the welding. And that's why I'm saying there's more opportunities on the S and X line. Now, it may not be like the final assembly that we're thinking where they're going in and getting the cabling and stuff like that, but there's still a lot that they would be able to tackle and be a part of. And so you could clearly say it's having an impact on the production and your learning.
Yes, a few thousand, he said. Now, the other thing that blew my mind, talking to Jeff lots about this, is that so initially when we were talking about the bots and you explained what's all the parts of the bot, you've gone through that really, really well. The most complicated part was the actuators, these actuators that, the joints that are mechanical, and you need 40 plus 42. And now that you have the hands and all that, it gets even more. And if it costs you $1,000 per actuator, then now we're talking 40 grand or whatever. That's the thing that they need to do. Now he's talking about ligaments, muscles. He's talking about something that's not metal per se, not actuator metal, something different in the forearms. And now you're talking about, for example, a ball and joint example or some sort of new thing. They're inventing it. They're creating it. There's no supply chain. It's not like you can just, like a car, you can basically just get suppliers to create for you and put it in. So this just accelerates Tesla's lead, and it's harder and harder for others to copy what you're doing if you don't have manufacturing scaling capability in your in-house.
And they may be thinking out of the box. So the idea of the muscle is that you do have these tendons that are in there, and you just need to be able to pull on them. So you want to have something to pull on that gives it, and then be able to relax it and put it back. And there's all sorts of ways, mechanisms you could come up with of being able to do that. And it's actuated some way, but you could come up with a very different way. They already designed something which is basically reeling it in, like almost like fishing line. You'd have something up, reel in, and then relax it and have it go out. That's the way those hand actuators work. So it's very different than the actuators that you're using in the shoulder or the elbow or anywhere else. Some of those are linear actuators, and some of them are rotary actuators. So it could be that's like, well, wait a minute, this is a very special case of being able to tug on a tendon. If you were going to design an actuator specifically for that, what would it look like? What would be the way? And so I have a feeling, it's been well over 2 years since the initial design. They must have come up with some other things, especially to be able to get them in the forearm in a way. And depending upon how successful that is, you might be able to say, well, wait a minute, could we use that to actuate other joints in other places as well? So it could be there is a lot of revision going on in the design of the kinds of actuators they have.
You and I have interviewed Bernd Bornick, CEO of 1X, and he has not revealed, but he basically told us that they don't have actuators in their bots because their bots need to be in the home. It needs to be so safe, so soft. He referred to ligaments on the arm.
Basically that. So it's
and maybe it's plastic, maybe it's
so they're running, these things that I would suspect might be some sort of Kevlar kind of material or cord that's going through that are acting as tendons. But at some place you've got actuation or something that's pulling on the strings. And it's like, where is that going in there? And exactly what does that look like? Are there some clever designs you can come up with that are a little bit different than just a motor that spins and winds something up?
Okay, let's watch the next clip, which is Elon talking about C-3PO and R2-D2. He said this a few times. You and I, again, we've been pointing this out to people. This is not just a humanoid robot program. Many of the AI members had referred to bot animals. a year ago. And so now here's talking about R2D2s. So this is not just a humanoid. Let's listen to what he's saying.
Basically, everyone's going to want one. So it's like, who wouldn't want? So like, there's different ways to think of robots, but like let's say R2D2 and C3PO were real, and you could have them. Like, who would not want R2D2 C3PO? That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Like a friendly buddy robot. Now we need to make sure they stay friendly, of course. That's very important.
I was hoping for a Garfield.
But I think it's kind of like people will get pretty attached to their humanoid robots, just like people, you get attached to C3PO and R2D2. I think everyone's going to pretty much want one. And I think long term, the cost of the humanoid robot should be less than the cost of a car because it weighs less. There's fewer parts in it. So ultimately, I think humanoid robot that is super useful, I think long term is probably like $20,000 or $25,000. But it depends on what a dollar's worth in the future, inflation and all. But current year dollars, I think I can see reaching a price of $20,000-$25,000 for a humanoid robot that would be really useful. That could help you take care of kids, walk the dog, go get groceries, like whatever works. So I think everyone's going to want one. So there's 8 billion people on Earth, and I think they're all going to want one. So that's why I think it's probably going to be the biggest thing ever.
Wow. Okay. What'd you take out of that?
Yeah. And I think then Elon went on to come up with some numbers. I think he's sort of right when he talks about, he said, whatever, a dollar means at that point, because we could be going into this weird deflationary kind of situation where things become cheaper, not more expensive. And that's something that Khatiwada has talked about is like, as you start to bring on these advanced manufacturing techniques, prices for lots of things will start to go down. And the economy is going to look so much different. I think David Shapiro has referred to it as like, the post-labor economy and understanding that. And somewhere in there, wasn't in that clip, but along there, Elon actually did use the term nutty. So he has been clearly listening to CERN Basher and used one of his terms. Then he also talked about bananas, that how when you start to do the math, it does get crazy.
Yeah.
And the analogy I use is that we understand Einstein's, field equations for general relativity, and it works really well, except as when you start to get towards, the singularity where you concentrate all these masses together, and then his math breaks down right at the event horizon. This is where we're sort of in, is that we don't realize that there's like this event horizon. And of course, Ray Kurzweil refers to it as the singularity in a way, because it's the same kind of problem that suddenly the numbers and everything get nutty. So when you start throwing out like $200 trillion valuations, it's just like, it doesn't mean anything anymore because, as Elon said, what does the dollar mean? Because it's just changed the value of everything, what are currencies and all that. So as we start to move into this kind of Star Trek economy, I guess things are going to be whatever it means. It's going to be a wild ride. It's very interesting. And everyone is going to have some sort of assistant to be able to help them, or companion to be able to do a lot of things. It's not going to be overnight, but eventually you would be in that stage that you'd be able to do it.
So you hear him talking, and he's saying the 3 examples he gave was walk your dog, go to the groceries, take care of your kids. Wow. So do you really see that happening? I mean, he's playing a consumer play. He said that, they have to be friendly looking. Yeah. You got to love C3PO. You got to love R2D2. This is the play. It really is consumer society impact.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we talked about in our panel is that there's so many different uses to the bot, and thinking about it's like, oh, he said $20,000 to $25,000. Well, for a lot of people, that might be a lot to spend on, this one more item that you would have around the house, with all the other things you want to have. How could you afford that? Could you get a loan for it? Well, I think you could get a loan for it because there's a certain amount of utility, right? It's like the reason why you get a loan for the car is it becomes kind of the collateral, and the bank decides that if you can't pay for it, well, we just take the car, we can sell it and get the money. Same thing with your home. There's like a lot of collateral in it. And when you buy your house, there's a lot of appliances that come with your house that you actually are folding into the mortgage. So why couldn't the bot be kind of part of the appliances in your house?
For sure.
But at the same time, when you buy a house, there's a couple of things a mortgage company requires. So like you have insurance, right? You have like fire detectors, and you have like all these other things that are kind of in there so that they know the house is kind of secure. Well, having a bot come with the house means you have kind of a super or supervisor that's going around the house to make sure it's always well maintained. And so since, the bank is considering, well, that's kind of our investment there, it's like, we want to make sure the house it remains in good order, that in case you default, we know it's all right. We don't want a leak in the roof that doesn't get detected for 2 months. We want to make sure that the filters in the air conditioning system are changed when they're supposed to. Caulking is done when it's supposed to, and on your window, all those little items. So yeah, it could be that if you want to get a discount on your mortgage, you better make sure there's a bot thrown in there to be able to guarantee that the house is going to be well.
Interesting thought. Yeah. Let's listen to his numbers that he threw out there.
The Optimus numbers, like they're like so mind blowing that you're like, is this real? But because I actually think the market for humanoid robots is in excess of 10 billion units, like more than the number of humans. Because people will each want one, and then there'll be others that are involved in industry and stuff. So if they do sell for $20,000, that's $200 trillion. This is just an insane number. That's why I wonder, what does money even mean at that point,
That's revenue. $200 trillion of revenue to Tesla. $200 trillion
revenue, right. When you sell that now, whether that's you're selling it in 1 year or 10 years, whatever, it's a big number. And I'm not sure what that makes the market cap. And again, and of course, they won't be the ones selling all the bots. There will be a lot of other companies in there, but it's telling you that there's this rather crazy TAM. And we have no idea of how the economy could accelerate from that. I mean, you could, some people might look at it that, oh, it's going to decelerate. Everyone's going to be without work or something like that. But you have what this Siobhan's paradox that sometimes talks about when you bring something in that's got like a lot of utility and everything else, it shakes up everything so much that it goes kind of counter to what you expect. So as it comes in, it may create so many more new industries and opportunities that, there's just tremendous growth that there's like more than enough room for companies with $100 trillion market caps, because the economy is just so much bigger right now that it actually can do it. But clearly, if you look at in today's dollars, the numbers are nutty. The numbers are bananas, whatever term you want to use there. But it means it is going to have a huge impact on society and what our living standards are going to be like. And of course, just the affordability of all kinds of things right now that are out of reach for most people.
Okay, let's go back to Nvidia and see their proposal, because they've found a way to accelerate, breakthrough how to train a bot to do whatever activity they want in a very simple, quick, fast way. The question is, right, Tesla has the ability to manufacture millions of bots faster, probably better than any of the other bot companies. If maybe the top 2 or 3, if not the only one that can do this. And then the argument is that, well, you need real world bots. The more bots you have in the real world, the more that they touch, the more that they interact with the real world. That's what's going to get you the lead. That's what's going to train things much better. You and I have interviewed a number of CEOs of humanoid bots. They believe that that's the case. But here's Nvidia, who has partnered with at least 9 bots companies we know of. They're providing the environment, the software tools, and then they're training them much through simulation. So let's tell us what it is first, and then I'd like you to tell me whether or not these guys can actually train. Basically, every bot will be as competitive as each other in terms of autonomy. So this is Jim Fan. He's in one of the top, basically the guy in charge of Project Groot in Nvidia, which is their team that's working on autonomous embodied AI. So he said, we've discovered a systematic way to scale up robot data, tackling the most painful pain point in robotics. The idea is simple. So a human collects demonstration on a real robot, and then we multiplied that data 1,000 times or more in simulation. So let's break it down. 1, we use Apple Vision Pro. Yeah, Apple Vision Pro, which is the headset to be able to, virtual reality, to give the human operator first-person control of the humanoid. Vision Pro parses human hand pose and retargets the motion to the robot hand all in real time. From the human's point of view, they're immersed in another body like the avatar. So they're basically teleoperating, right? It's slow and time consuming, but we can afford to collect a small amount of data. So they are teleoperating. Then they use a tool that they created called RoboCasa, a generative simulation framework to multiply the demonstration data by varying the visual appearance and layout of the environment. You saw that with a kitchen. They can create all sorts of different kitchens through simulation. In Jensen's keynote video below, the humanoid is now placing the cup in hundreds of kitchens with a huge diversity of textures, furniture, and object placement. We only have one physical kitchen at the Gear Lab, but we can conjure up infinite ones in simulation. Finally, we then use this tool that they created called MimicGen. It's a technique to multiply the above data even more by varying the motion of the robot. Generates vast number of new action trajectories based on original human data, filters out failed ones, like those that drop the cup, to form a much larger data set. Okay, what's your reaction to everything you just saw there? And we can go through what a RoboCast is, what MimicGen is, and so forth. So given one human trajectory with Vision Pro, RoboCasa produces as many as you want, varying visuals, and then MimicGen further augments it, varying motions.
Yes. Okay. So there's sort of two things that are, there are a lot of things we want to break down. So let's just start with the Apple Vision Pro. So part of the idea of the Apple Vision Pro is that the operator that's going in there is seeing everything from the perspective of the actual bot. So there's a physical bot right there. So pretty much they're seeing what the bot sees. Now, the Apple Vision Pro is very good at being able to recognize human gestures. And so by taking those human gestures, it's able to say, oh, this is what we want the bot to do. Now, this is using, sort of your traditional heuristic kind of code to say, take some Cartesian position in space and calculate the robot joint values to get it to the location that you want. So that means, because if you'll notice, the operators were there, they were not wearing data gloves or anything else. It was just the Apple Vision Pro. So that means it's very simple. It's not obtrusive. You don't have to wear anything else. So just by doing a lot of really fancy math, they're able to take your human movements and make the robot do the exact same thing, except you're able to see it from the perspective. So even though the operator is not right next to the table, it's very, very close, it's able to see the robot hand go over there and grab a glass or whatever the object is, and then perform that task. In this case, like, maybe it was putting the toast in the toaster, all these little tasks that are going to be there. Now, why do you need the humans to capture that? So if we kind of cycle back for a few years, and you might remember some of these videos that were called 2-minute papers that were talking a little bit about the early days of machine learning and AI, and in creating these intelligent little AI life forms, if you want to think about that, we're doing the hide and seek or learning to walk or playing the soccer game. And when they first started out, they had like arms and legs, but they couldn't walk. I mean, they were just like down the ground, and then they would just iterate and iterate. And it took a long time for them to be able to learn to kind of stand up and walk properly and do everything else. And eventually you get it to the point that the neural net understood how to actually move its virtual body in this virtual world. It took a really long time to get there. Then once it got there, things started to accelerate. It could learn to run, then it started kicking balls, and then they started playing these really aggressive soccer games that you're able to see. What they want to do is they want to, make the big jump from the beginning that we have a bot. We don't really know how to move it yet. We don't know what the actions are like to pick stuff up. Let's go ahead and get that. So we're very close to what the final answer is. And now we're going to bring that into simulation, because we don't want to have to pick up that object 1,000 times, all the different variations that we want to have in there, because we can think of so many different types of variations. Just keep on moving the object to different locations. That's the first thing. The other thing is change the backgrounds and everything that it's going to be in. All this again and again. And one of the things that Jim talked about is like, well, they just have one kitchen in their lab that they're able to operate in. But the thing is, everyone's kitchen at home is very different textures, very different configurations and layouts. So what you want to be able to do is, as you start training the bot again and again, you can change the environment virtually very, very quickly. And you've already started with some real world data. So that means you're very close to the solution that you want to have. So you can get lots and lots of variations. So that's one of the things they do in that robot Casa, is they're changing the environment to look different. The next thing is, remember, you want everything to be end to end. So you want to, pictures in, movement out. And the movement going out depends upon a lot of the mechanics of that arm. Now, you've already grabbed a little bit that, this is what it feels like to pick up this part using this particular bot. Now, I'm not sure that they can then take it from one robot chassis to another, to another, to another. So it might be very specified to a particular OEM's bot. It's like, okay, we're going to get that training data. We're going to learn how to grab everything with it. And now they have that other part, which is the mimic, which goes very close to sort of being able to get the idea of what's it really going to feel like and optimize it. So Jim points out that it's really tedious. I mean, even with the Apple Vision Pro and everything, it's a bit slow to pick these things up. So it's not the ideal thing. And now that you kind of have it doing something, then you might want to go through and then let Mimic say, okay, let's optimize this thing so we can really pick up a glass really quickly. We can pick up different kinds of glasses. So now what it means is that you don't have to iterate a lot. And if you remember, the Stanford students were talking about, they did a task like 50 or 100 times the same task again and again. We don't want to do that. We want to do one task with that kind of object. That's it. Now do it with another kind of object, do it with another one, and then you get a much broader training set really quickly and then scale it up that way. So to me, it's the logical way of going about it. And so I'm not surprised this is the framework they've come up with. What they've done is they've proven it can be done. Or it's an approach that probably everyone else is doing, and I suspect Tesla's doing the same thing. It's just that Tesla, rather than using the Apple Vision Pro, was using a different kind of setup for the telerobotic operation. All that matters is you get the telerobotic input, and then from that, you can start getting your training sets.
Yeah. So if this works out, and it sounds like it will, you may not need to have, like you said, 1,000 robots physically touching all sorts of things.
You won't need 1 million. That's the thing, is you won't need 1 million. You're still going to need 1,000. You're still going to need a lot, because there's a lot of different kinds of objects out there that you need to pick.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of glasses. Oh, all these different glasses. Notice what they were doing. They were picking up toast. I was like, oh yeah, toast is a weird object, isn't it? I forget about that. And he was putting honey on the toast. Like, whoa, that's even weird, picking up the honey bottle.
Yeah.
So you can see there's so many different objects. Then you've got to pick up silverware and all these other things. So there's plenty of things you want to do. And you want to just have one bot that's going through all those different things, or do you want to have lots of bots that are able to go in and have some that are dealing with glasses, and some that are picking up potatoes and oranges, and others that are picking up with eggs. And then, so you still want to have 1,000.
Gotcha.
And that's going to help you accelerate that.
So this is their explanation. This is just July last month, right? This is Nvidia. Xiaolong Wang said, we're introducing open television. So this is a fully autonomous video. We can conduct a long horizon task with inserting 12 cans nonstop without interruptions. So this is teleoperation. This is what is it? Here we go. So achieved by imitation learning from teleoperation. So we propose a VR-based real-time teleoperation. That's the Apple Vision Pro that streams the stereo video observation from the robot camera to the VR device. Right. So the eyes, the video, the cameras on the bot streams it to the device. The robot neck moves as a human head moves. The robot hands move as a human hands move, offering the operator an intuitive experience as a human herself becomes the robot. So it says the devils are in the details, and how to implement things right, how to perform retargeting for smooth and precise control, how to do all these and stream stereo video with no latency, all in real time. So this is what they were working on to show that they can use the Apple Vision Pro. So this is a bot, but there's a person that's basically controlling him using the Apple Vision Pro, and then the bot is doing what the person is doing.
Yes, exactly. So I think Jim used the analogy of like in the movie Avatar, where you had a person that was sitting somewhere else, and that with that they were able to go out in the field and experience what everyone else is doing. It's the same thing. So either you could be a couple of feet away, or you could be remotely somewhere else. And as she points out, the big thing is latency. So we know, like any video games or something like that, if it's very slow for things to react to what you're doing, it's very hard to keep up. So they need to do a lot of things very quickly. One is to identify the posture you're in. And then the IK she's referring to is the inverse kinematic. So, now that I know where you want the hand to be in some Cartesian location, I have to calculate the joint values. And I have to do that very quickly with low latency. It's nice to have the headset, because with the headset, you get the stereo. And with the stereo, you really feel like you're there. And it's a lot easier to figure out how to pick up an object in stereo as opposed to not. And again, they talked about an egocentric point of view, so that you are at the point of view of the bot. And it's very important. And this is probably why Tesla realized they wanted to get the head movement as well, is that when we are doing operations telerobotically or anything, our head is like involved in a lot of things. We don't keep everything stiff when we're going on and wanting to look at something. So if you put that restriction on the teleoperator, it's going to be very, very hard for them to do things. You want them to be able to naturally. So, I'm looking over here where that is. I got to go over there to get something else. need to put that in there. So the bot had to be able to also be able to do the head motions at the same time.
Okay. Let's take a look at RoboCasa. So this is the other part of it. So they've announced RoboCasa, a large-scale simulation framework for everyday tasks. We use generative AI tools to create diverse objects, scenes, and tasks. Simulation plays a pivotal role in our data pyramid for training generalist robots. So in simulation, they can create, again, using generative AI, they can create all sorts of things. Let's watch the video that they shared about that. This is all simulation.
Yes.
There you go. That's
so
a
different objects wherever you want, so you can change the positions of the objects constantly. So it has to understand how to grab it, and if it's a different location.
How does it know what a broccoli? It's just pixels. How does it know what a broccoli really is?
It's probably identifying. So that object's going to go in there, and then what you're doing is you're doing a synthetic sort of image capture of that, and saying this is what your camera is going to see. Now you have to identify what that is and figure out what the correct location is going to be. So you can have different objects everywhere, and then of course you can have the same objects, but in a different kitchen to see if the background is somehow going to be influencing that. Now, they've done that with automated driving systems for years. I mean, the simulations that they try to do with the cars is the same idea. As I know how to go down this road, but I need to change the conditions of that road of being, when the sun is setting, when it's dark, when it's a little bit cloudy, if it's raining and stuff like that. And so the idea of the simulation system is not to create a really nice ray trace image for us to look at and play in a video game. It was to actually recreate what that camera would be seeing and all these other cameras would be seeing and bring it in. So it has no idea it's looking at a synthetic world. It thinks it's the real world. Now, what they were doing is they were showing us kind of what is there. Now, there's a little bit of a cheat in that you and I know that's broccoli, and the system knows where the broccoli is and knows precisely where that is. But that's not a bad thing, because then when the vision system is looking around there, and if it says that's a potato, I can say, that's not a potato. I know it's a broccoli, what you're supposed to identify over there. And when you do get it right, you will be able to tell if it gets the location of it right. So in many cases, you'd be able to tell, since I'm creating the scene, I know how many of different items are in there, and I ask it to find all the different items. And if it either misidentifies them, or if it doesn't identify a couple, gets the count wrong, I will know immediately because I know the answer already.
I do notice that this video that they shared here, it's cartoon-like. It's not real world like this. I don't know. Does that look like it's real world to you? Versus, take a look. You can actually see the reflection.
You need more shadows, right?
You can see the reflection that's coming out of the coffee maker. But my point is that when you see Tesla and what they did with their generative AI, you can't tell the difference between a street and a tree and a fire hydrant. It looks like a real video of a real world,
right?
Because that's the data that they fed it. Versus this one, when you tell it to create a scene, it's using animation.
And it seems like it's using the normal kind of video gaming animation. I'm surprised they're not using like RTX, where you do the ray tracing in order to get your shadows correctly. Because when you go in a real environment, that's what you're seeing. And that's what you want to see, is your vision system able to pick up these subtleties. That's the difference between the real world, is that shading and shadows gives us an awful lot of information about the environment. And if you take them away, that means you could be training your vision system wrong. And they've seen that many times. I mean, even it happens in the real world that they were, very early on in the automotive companies, when they were setting up these vision systems to identify things, it was working perfectly in the lab. Then they would get it out on the factory, and it wouldn't work for a couple of reasons. One is the lighting was different. In some cases, they had skylights, so the sun was coming in and doing things, or the shadows were a little bit different. And then the other things, it turns out the production gears that were coming in were really shiny because they still had a lot of lubricant still on them, whereas the ones they were doing in the lab were nice and clean and looked kind of matte rather than, being. So it's like all these subtle little things you got to make sure that the vision system is able to pick up on those cues, which is why in many cases you have to go back to the real world constantly. And I think that was the last step that they were talking about, is that when they're all done, it's like, well, now we're going to have to go ahead and verify this. So it's nice that you are able to get the data set captured very quickly, but you're going to still need a pretty good number of real world bots to verify that these tasks that you've been training, that you're confident it's able to do it in the kitchen now, you want to go ahead and demonstrate it, and then see, okay, if it's not working right, then we have to go back and reteach it. But again, they're putting stuff in there to optimize the human movements, to see what range of movement they have that they can get away with that will allow them to optimize it up to the point that, if a movement has failed, that it drops something rather than picking it up. And throw that out. That was bad. Try again.
Okay, well, so we just took a look at Nvidia. Just the progress is unbelievable. They made these announcements over the months. Now they've put them all together into one whole new system. They look like they're pretty proud of it. It looks like that it's going to work. And then, of course, there's Elon talking about Tesla Bot and Optimus. I think we should leave this episode here with Elon clip. This time he's talking about like how big of a deal is this? We've been talking bots. We know it's a big deal, but how big of a deal really is this? Let's listen to what he thinks it is.
Yeah, and we'll continue to make new products that we haven't talked about at all. So there's new things that'll come out. But the really ultra profound thing is full self-driving. Unsupervised full self-driving. That's like the gigantic thing. And then Optimus having an autonomous, useful humanoid robot is an even bigger thing than full self-driving. But those are the two things that, like, if you were to look back in history from, fast forward like 20, 30 years or 50 years even, like what are the things that really were profound? It'll be unsupervised, a general solution to unsupervised full self-driving, and a humanoid robot that is truly useful. Even 100 years from now, they'll be like, whoa, those are big ones.
100 years from now, those are the big ones. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. So it's going to be up to the historians to decide when certain things happen. So, we're looking at these different industrial revolutions. And I always talked about, like, they actually gave a date when the Industrial Revolution began. I think it was like the date when
printing
an iron bridge was built in London. Now, when that happened, the newspapers in London did not scream that, the Industrial Revolution just began today. It was one of those things that later on you realize the significance of the event. Just like the First World War wasn't called that until we had the second one. It had a different name, okay? So usually it will be only 25, 50 years in the future that the historians will be able to look back at this time, this era, and say, so what were the significant things? What were the things that really brought us to where we are? And there's a good chance that they're going to be kind of pointing at that and saying, yes, these were the major changes. And then, they're going to want to then pull the threads on that and say, and then, what was the significant, thing that triggered that? What was the event in AI? What was like the groundbreaking paper that changed everything? And of course, we know that when it comes to physics, it's always Einstein's papers in 1905. At that time, no one realized how significant those papers are going to be until years later. And it's going to be the same thing here, is that there's going to be some seminal moments that were definitely when a couple academic papers came out that caused these other things, and that then created or allowed us to do something that science fiction had been talking about for an entire century.
And this is bigger than just humanoid bots and and R2D2 bots. Yeah. Here's Elon talking about Neuralink.
One cool thing I should mention is that would be, I think, interesting down the road is also for Optimus, for people that have lost their limbs, that if you take Neuralink, basically being able to control, which the Neuralink version 1 telepathy allows you to control electronic devices. If somebody's lost their arms or legs or whatever the case, and attaching that and combining that with a Neuralink would give them essentially cybernetic limbs. Kind of like Luke Skywalker and Empire Strikes Back, where you get like a robot hand. So I think that could be pretty incredible for people that have lost limbs, being able to have like a cybernetic limb. I think that'd be cool. Sort of combined effort between Neuralink and Tesla.
It's another reason why, back to the earlier conversation about the forearm, the more human-like that they make it, the more likely that when you connect that to a human nerve system or the brain directly to the arm, because you've lost your paralyzed or something like that, that's why they're doing it.
Yeah, and they probably also studied a lot of the prosthetic hands that are out there, because they're already doing something like that. And they are trying to be actuated by, some of the muscles that are kind of already there, that are left over. to give a little bit of movement. So it's very clever what a lot of these prosthetic manufacturers have done to be able to get actuation without having to have like a big battery pack and motors and everything else to have the human body do that. So when Elon keeps on talking about that, it tells me that they're coming up with a much lighter kind of packaging that has to go in there. And then you think about how do you actuate these things? Where's the energy source coming from? Are you taking it directly from the human body, or is there some kind of supplemental energy source that we needed to be able to do that? But of course, the most important thing is the ability to communicate that information. And so from the Neuralink, you would just think what it is you want to be able to do and then get the actuation from it. So clearly there's going to be, some need for electrical energy to be able to do that. You're going to need a battery pack. The question is the actuation energy coming from a battery pack, or is it also connected to other muscle groups?
Wow, very inspirational. I'm pumped up. This is happening. It's happening fast. Not just Tesla, all these companies we've been talking to. Nvidia is showing that they've made major improvements. Training, autonomy, it's not as hard as we all thought. At least it's a pathway to make it happen. And now we're talking about crazy stuff because it's possibly real. I appreciate you, Scott. Really, really fortunate that we get to pick your brain. You really have just great knowledge. And I love the way you describe things. Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Herbert. And just a shout out to, I think, it's the Tesla LA Owners Group. They gave me this nice little T-shirt which says Regen Mode, but I had to get it because it also says Regen in German, which means rain. So it has like two meanings, either rain mode or regen mode.
There you go. Thank you to Tesla owner Silicon Valley because it was at the X Takeover event that they invited Elon. He spent an hour with us, including Franz von Holzhausen. And he were able to give this new information that he shared with the retail shareholders. So that was fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. Bye, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Herbert.
I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.